As a cynical sound engineer, I thought I'd heard every human emotion perfectly mixed and packaged. But then a deaf singer walked onto my stage, and her performance made our legendary TV host shatter live on air, desperately signing a question that would unravel a family. My name is Alex, and for the last 8 years, my world has been a universe of sound, contained within a pair of expensive headphones. I'm a senior sound engineer for Starlight Search, the biggest talent show on television. I've heard it all. The pitch-perfect divas, the screeching wannabes, the sob stories set to a swelling orchestral track. My job is to make it all sound clean, crisp, and emotionally manipulative for the millions watching at home. I live on a razor's edge of feedback and frequency, and honestly, it's made me cynical. In my booth, behind a wall of glass and a console that looks like a spaceship cockpit, emotion is just another waveform to be compressed and equalized. So when Brenda, our shark-in-a-pantsuit executive producer, told us about the next contestant, I just rolled my eyes. "We've got a deaf singer, people," she'd announced in our pre-show meeting, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "This is ratings gold, the girl who feels the music. I want tight shots on her face, I want the judges looking emotional, and Alex, I want her mic so hot we can hear her breathe. Make it intimate, I hated it already. It felt exploitative, another gimmick to be packaged and sold. A deaf singer. The technical challenges alone were a nightmare. We had to set up a vibrating platform on the stage so she could feel the beat from the band, and fit her with a special bone conduction earpiece that would send the vibrations of the music directly into her skull. To me, she was just a series of problems to be solved. Problem 17, as she was on the day's call sheet. Her name was Ilara. When she walked onto the stage, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. She was tiny, swallowed by the vastness of the stage and the blinding spotlights. She clutched the microphone stand like a lifeline, her eyes wide, darting from the judges' table to the roaring, faceless crowd, and then to the host, the legendary Steve Harper. An interpreter stood just off to the side, a quiet shadow ready to bridge the gap between her silent world and our loud one. Steve, ever the professional, approached her with a gentle smile. "Welcome to Starlight Search, Ilara. We're so happy to have you. Can you tell us what you'll be singing tonight?" The interpreter's hands flew, and Ilara's eyes followed them. She took a breath, her own hands trembling slightly. She signed back, and the interpreter's voice filled the studio. "I'll be singing Hallelujah. It was my mother's favorite song." She used to place my hands on her throat when she sang it so I could feel the melody. A collective awe rippled through the audience. In my booth, I muttered to my junior engineer, "Cue the violins." Brenda's voice crackled in my headset. "Yes, that's the stuff. Alex, you getting this?" I just grunted in response, my fingers dancing across the console, making sure her microphone was ready for the inevitable pitchy train wreck. I was expecting it to be painful, a well-intentioned disaster that we'd have to sweeten in post-production to make it sound even remotely passable. The band started, a soft, reverent piano intro. I saw Ilara close her eyes, her bare feet planted firmly on the stage. She wasn't listening, she was absorbing. One hand rested on her stomach, the other still gripping the microphone stand. The first line of the song came, and the voice that filled my headphones was not what I expected. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the polished, auto-tuned sound I was used to. It was raw. It was haunting. There was a slight tremor to it, a vulnerability that no vocal coach could ever teach. She wasn't hitting the notes. She was feeling them. Each verse was a story, each chorus a wave of pure, unfiltered emotion that you could feel in your bones. I glanced at the monitors. The judges, usually so composed and critical, were mesmerized. One of them, a tough-as-nails rock star, was openly weeping. The audience was dead silent, a sea of thousands completely captivated. In the booth, for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about levels or compression. I was just listening. I was watching this girl who lived in a world without sound create something more beautiful than anything I'd ever heard. The final note hung in the air, a perfect fragile thing, before the studio erupted. It was thunderous, an absolute explosion of applause and cheers that shook the entire building. Elara opened her tear-filled eyes, bewildered, as she felt the vibrations of the ovation through the floor. Steve walked towards her, his own face streaked with tears. He looked completely undone. He stood before her, trying to speak, but only a choked sob came out. He gestured to the cheering crowd, to the weeping judges, trying to convey the magnitude of what she had just done. Through her interpreter, he finally managed to ask, How does that feel?" Elara looked from Steve to the roaring crowd, a look of profound, dawning comprehension on her face. She let go of the mic stand. She didn't sign to her interpreter. She looked directly into the main camera as if she could see every single person watching at home. Slowly, she lifted her hands and formed a simple, elegant sign. "Thank you." And that's when it happened. Steve Harper, the unflappable, charismatic host of the biggest show on television, completely shattered. It wasn't just crying. He let out a gut-wrenching sob that his microphone picked up and blasted through the studio and into my headphones. He doubled over, his body shaking. Brenda's voice screamed in my ear, "What is happening? Cut to the judges! Get a wide shot!" But we were all frozen, watching our host fall apart on live television. This was more than being moved by a song. This was something deeper, something intensely personal. Then, through his tears, Steve straightened up, his eyes locked on Elara. He lifted his own trembling hands, and he began to sign back. It wasn't, "You're welcome." It was something else, something urgent and complex, a flurry of movement that made Elara's eyes widen in shock, and the onstage interpreter gasp, covering her mouth with her hand. In my booth, all hell broke loose. "Cut his mic! Cut his mic!" Brenda shrieked into my headset, her voice shrill with panic. "Go to commercial! Somebody get me a wide shot of the judges and go to commercial now!" My hands flew across the board on instinct, killing Steve's audio feed and punching up the canned audience applause track to cover the raw, ragged sound of his sobbing. The screens in front of me flickered to a car commercial, but my eyes were still locked on the live backstage feed. The chaos on stage was a silent movie of frantic stagehands and bewildered producers, but I wasn't watching them. I was watching Steve and Elara. His hands were still moving, forming signs that were clumsy, rusty, but filled with a desperate, frantic energy. It was like watching a man trying to remember a forgotten language to shout for help. Elara just stared, her face a mask of utter shock, her own hands frozen at her sides. The interpreter, a woman named Maria, who I knew to be unflappable, looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her professional composure was gone, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. My professional curiosity, the part of me that always wants to solve the audio puzzle, took over. I rerouted the feeds, ignoring Brenda's continued screaming. The interpreter's lapel mic was still live, meant only for the production team. I isolated it, cranking the gain, filtering out the noise of the stagehands. I heard her muttering to herself, a choked whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "No, it can't be." "It's not possible." "What's not possible, Maria?" A stage manager's voice crackled on the same channel. Maria's voice was trembling. "His signs. They're broken, but I can understand them. He's asking her. He's asking her where she learned to sign like that. He's signing, 'Who are you? Please, tell me who you are.'" The commercial break ended in what felt like seconds. Brenda had made a decision. An emergency protocol was enacted. Steve was nowhere to be seen. A guest judge, looking flustered and unprepared, was suddenly in his spot, reading awkwardly from a teleprompter, announcing that Steve had been overcome with emotion and needed a moment. Elara was escorted off stage, looking completely dazed. The show lurched forward, a clumsy, awkward mess, but the damage was done. The internet was already exploding. Number sign, "Where is Steve?" was trending worldwide. For the rest of the show, I was on autopilot. I mixed the sound for a boy band and a magician, but my mind was elsewhere. I was replaying the moment in my head. Steve's breakdown wasn't just about a moving performance. His reaction was primal. It was pain. And his signing, it wasn't just a gesture of solidarity. It was a question. A desperate life-or-death question aimed at a girl he'd never met. As soon as the credits rolled, I pulled the raw audio and video files from the server. This was against every rule in my contract, a fireable offense, but I didn't care. I had to know. I synced up the isolated camera angle on Steve with Maria's whispered translation from her lapel mic. I watched it again and again. The part that had shocked Maria the most wasn't just the question. It was a specific sign Steve had made right at the end, just before the stagehands reached him. It was a complex gesture, one I didn't recognize. I saw Maria on the footage lean in and ask Elara something, her back to the camera. Elara, looking pale and shaken, responded with a flurry of signs. I couldn't read them, but I didn't need to. I still had Maria's audio. I rewound and listened to her next whispered words, spoken into her mic as if she were documenting a historical event. She says it's a sign for family, a special one. From the woman who taught her to sing, the woman who found her on the streets and raised her after her parents died, the woman she called Mom. There was a pause, and then Maria's voice dropped even lower, filled with a dawning horror. She said the woman's name was Sarah. My blood ran cold. Steve Harper's daughter, the one the tabloids said was backpacking through Europe, finding herself. Her name was Sarah. This was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. But as I scrubbed through the footage one last time, my eyes caught something I'd missed. When Elara had first signed "Thank you," it wasn't just the standard sign. It was slightly different. A small, almost imperceptible flourish at the end, a little twist of the wrist. And when I looked at the footage of Steve, broken and sobbing as he desperately tried to sign back, I saw it. He was mirroring her, his clumsy hands trying to replicate that exact same unique flourish. He wasn't just recognizing a language, he was recognizing a dialect of two, a secret language between a father and a daughter he thought he had lost forever. I suddenly felt like I was holding a live grenade. This wasn't a TV moment anymore. This was a family tragedy playing out on a national stage. I was about to shut everything down when I saw movement on the backstage camera feed, which was still recording. It was Steve, his face pale and tear-streaked, being cornered by Brenda near the dressing rooms. She was furious, her arms crossed, her face a mask of corporate rage. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could lip-read enough to know it was bad. Then Steve grabbed her arm, his eyes blazing with an intensity I had never seen. He said something that made Brenda stumble back, her own face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost and was now willing to burn down the world to find out if it was real. He turned and stormed down the hallway, not towards his own dressing room, but towards the one where they were holding Alara. My fingers tightened on my mouse, my knuckles white. I was a ghost in the machine, watching a drama unfold that I had no right to see. I patched the audio from a security camera in the hallway into my headphones just as Steve reached the door marked Contestant 17. Two beefy security guards blocked his path, their arms crossed, their expressions impassive. "You can't go in there, Mr. Harper," one of them said, his voice a low rumble. "Ms. Vance's orders." Brenda's orders. Of course. She was already in damage control mode, trying to lock down the story, to contain the fallout. Steve didn't even look at them. His eyes were fixed on the door, as if he could see through it. "Move," he said. It wasn't a request. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual polished charm, leaving only gravel and grief. "I'm not asking." "Sir, we have our instructions," the second guard said, taking a half-step forward. Steve finally turned his head, and the look in his eyes made even these mountains of men flinch. It was the look of a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. "My daughter might be in that room," he said, his voice cracking on the word daughter. "You have 2 seconds to get out of my way before I walk through you." There was no bluff in his voice. He meant it. The guards exchanged a nervous glance, their corporate loyalty warring with the raw paternal anguish in front of them. Before they could decide, the door swung open from the inside. It was Maria, the interpreter. She looked at Steve, then at the guards, and her expression hardened with a resolve I hadn't seen before. "He's with me," she said, her voice clear and firm. She looked directly at Steve. "She's asking for you." That was all it took. The guards stepped aside, and Steve pushed past them into the small, sterile dressing room. I switched my video feed to the camera inside. The room was bare, just a sofa, a mirror lined with light bulbs, and a small table. Alara was sitting on the sofa, her knees drawn up to her chest. She looked even smaller and more fragile than she had on stage. When she saw Steve, her eyes widened. She didn't look scared, just watchful, waiting. Steve stopped a few feet away from her, his whole body trembling. He looked completely lost, unsure of what to do or say. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Maria stepped between them, a calm anchor in a sea of unspoken emotion. She signed to Alara, her hands moving with gentle precision. "I still had her mic feed. He wants to know about the woman who taught you, Sarah." Alara's eyes flickered to Steve, then back to Maria. Her own hands began to move, telling a story. Maria's voice followed, soft and steady in my ears. "She says Sarah was her angel. She found Alara living on the streets when she was 9. Alara's parents had passed away, and she had no one. Sarah took her in. She couldn't hear, but Sarah didn't care. Sarah taught her everything: how to read, how to be brave, how to feel music. She would press Alara's ear against her guitar and play for hours. She taught her the special family sign for thank you, the one Sarah's father had taught her." Steve let out a choked sound, a mix between a sob and a gasp. He took a stumbling step closer, his eyes pleading. "Where is she?" he whispered, the words barely audible. "Alara, please. Where is Sarah now?" Maria translated. Alara's expression, which had been soft with memory, clouded over. A shadow of pain crossed her face. She looked down at her hands, hesitating. Then she slowly began to sign again. The story that unfolded was devastating. Maria's voice was thick with emotion as she relayed it. They were happy. For 5 years they were a family, but Sarah got sick. A rare blood disorder, the doctors said. They didn't have much money. Sarah spent everything she had on treatment, on trying to stay with Alara. But it wasn't enough. Alara's hands paused. She took a deep, shuddering breath before continuing. Maria translated, her own voice breaking. She says Sarah died 2 years ago. She was holding Alara's hand. Her last words, she signed them. She signed, "Don't let the music die." The room fell silent. The only sound was Steve Harper's ragged breathing. He sank to his knees, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The backpacking trip, the emails he thought were from her. It was all a lie he'd wanted to believe because the truth was too painful. His daughter wasn't finding herself in Europe. She had been here, just a few 100 miles away, living in poverty, raising a lost child, and dying alone. He looked up at Alara, his face a canvas of unimaginable grief. He saw his daughter's legacy in her eyes, the song, the signs, the raw, beautiful soul on his stage. It was all Sarah. Sarah had sent her. Alara had auditioned for Starlight Search to fulfill her mother's dying wish, to not let the music die. It was all a message, a final heartbreaking letter from a daughter to a father who had never stopped looking for her. I felt like an intruder, a voyeur witnessing a moment so profoundly private that it felt sacred. I reached to cut the feed, to give them their privacy. This wasn't for me, or for Brenda, or for the millions of viewers. This was just for them. But just as my finger hovered over the button, Brenda's voice, cold and sharp, cut through my headset. "Don't you dare touch that, Alex. Keep it rolling. This is the season finale." I froze, disgusted. She wasn't seeing a grieving father. She was seeing ratings. She was seeing a primetime special. I looked back at the monitor. Steve was still on his knees. He looked broken, but then something shifted in his expression. The grief was still there, but it was being forged into something else, something hard and protective. He slowly got to his feet and looked directly at Alara. He signed something simple. Maria didn't even need to translate. It was a sign anyone could understand. He pointed at Alara, then made a fist and placed it over his own heart. "You, me, family." Then he turned and walked out of the room, his shoulders squared. He strode past the bewildered guards and down the hallway, directly towards the main control room, directly towards Brenda, directly towards me. He knew we were watching. I could see the reflection of the hallway lights in his eyes on the security camera feed, and they were burning with a righteous fury. He was no longer a grieving father. He was an avenging one, and he was coming for us. The door to the control room burst open with a force that rattled the monitors. Steve Harper stood there, silhouetted against the bright hallway lights. He wasn't the polished TV host anymore. He was a storm. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing the terrified junior producers and landing squarely on Brenda, who stood by my console with her arms crossed, trying to project an aura of authority that was rapidly dissolving. "Get out," Steve said, his voice dangerously quiet. Brenda scoffed, though it lacked her usual conviction. "Steve, this is a professional disaster. We need to handle this. I'm thinking a special The Alara Story, hosted by you. It'll be tasteful, emotional." "I said," Steve repeated, taking a slow step into the room, "get out. All of you, except for you." His gaze shifted and locked onto me. My heart hammered against my ribs. He pointed a trembling finger at the main screen, which was still showing the live feed from Alara's dressing room. Kill the feed. Kill all of it. Now I didn't hesitate. My loyalty wasn't to Brenda or the network anymore. It was to the broken man in front of me and the girl in that room. I hit a master kill switch, and every screen showing the backstage footage went black. Brenda gasped, as if I'd just thrown $1 million into a fire. "What are you doing?" "Alex, you're fired." "You can't fire him, Brenda," Steve said, his voice laced with ice. "Because as of right now, you no longer work here. This is my show. My name is on it, my face is on it, and I own a controlling stake in the production company that you seem to have forgotten about. Your access has been revoked. Security will see you out." He didn't raise his voice, but the finality in his tone was absolute. Brenda's face went from furious to ashen. She opened her mouth, then closed it, and for the first time since I'd met her, she was utterly defeated. She turned and walked out of the room without another word. Once the room was empty, it was just Steve and me. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the equipment. He walked over to my console and slumped into the chair beside me, burying his face in his hands. The fury was gone, replaced by a wave of grief so profound it seemed to suck the air out of the room. "My little girl," he whispered. "My Sarah. All this time, I thought she hated me. I didn't know what to say. I was just a sound guy. But in that moment, I wasn't an employee. I was just a person, sitting with another person in immense pain." "What happened?" I asked softly. He took a shaky breath and began to talk. He told me about the fight they'd had. Sarah had wanted to use her trust fund to start a charity for homeless youth. Steve, ever the protective father, had refused. He thought it was a naive, dangerous idea. He wanted her to finish college, to be safe. They had said terrible things to each other. She had stormed out, and he, in his stubborn pride, had let her go. He'd spent the last 7 years and a fortune on private investigators trying to find her, chasing false leads, clinging to the fabricated emails that a so-called friend of hers was sending him, likely for money. All this time, he thought she was punishing him. He never imagined the truth was so much more tragic. "She wasn't punishing me," he said, his voice thick with tears. "She was living her dream. She was doing what she wanted to do all along. She saved that girl. She gave Alara. She gave her a life." He looked up at me, a flicker of his old self returning. "And I'm not going to let Brenda or anyone else turn her legacy into a ratings gimmick." The next few hours were a blur. Steve made calls, lawyers were summoned, network executives were woken up. By dawn, the narrative was no longer in Brenda's hands. It was in Steve's. The next evening, there was no show. Instead, at 8 p.m., Steve Harper walked onto a bare starlight search stage. There were no flashing lights, no roaring crowd, just a single stool and a camera. He looked straight into the lens, and for the first time, he told the world the whole truth. He spoke of his daughter, Sarah, not as a missing person, but as a hero. He told the story of her kindness, her rebellion, her fierce love for a child she had found and raised as her own. He told the world about Alara. Then he brought Alara out onto the stage with Maria by her side. He announced that Starlight Search was being suspended indefinitely. In its place, he was launching the Sarah Harper Foundation, dedicated to supporting at-risk and homeless youth, with a special focus on those with disabilities. The show's entire remaining budget, millions of dollars, would be its first donation. Alara, he announced, would be on its board of directors. She was not a contestant to be judged anymore. She was family. He turned to Alara, and his hands, steadier now, began to move. He was still clumsy, but the love behind the signs was clear. "Your mother sent you here so her music wouldn't die," he signed. "Her music was love, and it will never die as long as we're here to share it." Elara watched him, tears streaming down her face, and then, for the first time, she signed directly to him, not for a camera or a crowd, but just for him. Her hands moved with a grace that was heartbreakingly familiar. I didn't need an interpreter to understand. She was telling him all the stories Sarah had told her, stories of a funny, loving father who taught his daughter a secret sign for thank you. I was in the booth, running the sound for this final broadcast. It was the simplest mix of my career, just one man's voice, raw and honest. As Steve finished, the stage was silent. There was no applause, but then something incredible happened. On the live social media feeds displayed on my monitors, a symbol started appearing. It was the American Sign Language sign for "I love you." First a few, then dozens, then thousands, then tens of thousands, flooding the screen from all over the world. The entire studio audience, who had been asked to stay, slowly, silently, got to their feet. And as one, they all raised their hands, creating a forest of love directed at the man and the girl on the stage. Steve saw it. Elara felt it. He put his arm around her, his granddaughter, and held her close. In that silent, beautiful moment, I realized that for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't just engineering sound, I was witnessing it. The sound of a broken family becoming whole again. The sound of a legacy, not of stardom, but of love, finally being heard. And it was the most perfect thing I had ever listened to.